Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. I guess that's a little bit of the shelter in place blues. But I'm happy in this moment because I'm here once again with my celestial friend, Lucian Schloss, the light, to talk about the signs of these strange times. How in the heavens are you, brother?
Doing all right.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. I did get a chance to go out and check out the moon like you, because it was my, what do you call it?
Metonic moon return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a cool experience, and luckily a clear night in Oregon. So good for some stargazing.
I'm stoked. Yeah. So the Metonic moon return every 19 years. So let me rewind. The moon returns to the same sign where she was at the time of our birth every 27 and a third days about, and the same phase every 29 and a half days, but those two rhythms sync every 19 years. 19 years is 235 lunations. So turning 48, the second 19, now it's been 470 lunations for you. So it's really cool because on the 19s, 19, 38, 57, 76, 95, it's likely that the moon will be really strongly aligned, not only to the stars where she was at the time of our birth, like sidereal, but also in the phase synodic. So we get to experience the way that the moon reflects the one light to Earth in that kind of creative way every 19 years. I think it's just such a magical window. I was really blessed to find out about that shortly before I turned 38, so I could just go drink some moon that night and get turned on. How was it for you?
It was great. It was great. It was a good, I mean, it was a bit of an odd birthday, I think, just because of what's going on in the world. But, you know, yeah, it was good. I mean, it's been a potent, you know, I think one of the blessings of studying astrology or being an astrologer, like as you age, is just like each age has significance, right? Like you can align with, you know, what are those developmental steps, right? Astrologically, each year is not the same.
That is for sure.
Yeah,
and it's amazing how there are like generational or like age-based things that happen for us. Like everybody has a Metonic moon return at 38.
right.
I mean, it's not, you know, it's stronger for some than it is for others. And I mean, it's kind of like ultimately expressed if you're in your birthplace, but many of us were born with the moon below the horizon. And then on that level, it's not really anyway.
Right.
It'd be better to be somewhere where you can actually see it. And 38, like 36 is eclipse returns, 37.2.
37's the nodes.
You know, so
Saturn. It's a busy, you know, it's a
but
busy
then like
time of life.
your chart is positioned in such a way that you were born in that place on Earth where, you know, one of your angles is now aligned to where Uranus is, right? And so it's so cool to tune into how some of these things are very age-based, like also say Hellenistically, because you just turned 38, you're in a third house profection, right? But then some of them are so unique to the native, and you know how this is looking at charts, like it's so cool to see how a soul has kind of mapped these initiations out to say, oh yeah, like here's this thing, let's add a dash of Uranus to that for my personal experience, which
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah, totally. So the unique transits that happen at unique times in your life based on your angles, um, and then um, and then that more generic cycle. Um, and they do. I mean, I would be interesting if you see in your readings if those, like the Pluto square Pluto, or the Uranus opposition, or some of these massive kind of midlife tectonic um, transits, how you see those matching up with individuals. I mean, I imagine there seems to be a synchronicity between
for
like,
sure. Like you'll see, like,
yeah.
I was talking to a client yesterday who has Mars square Pluto in his nativity.
Mhm.
And Mars is in like a higher degree of his sign. And so what happened for this guy is he had Pluto square Pluto, and then right on its heels, the Pluto opposite to his Mars. And
Right.
interestingly, the Mars and Pluto in his nativity are distanced in such a way that Jupiter was conjoined Pluto for the Pluto square Pluto, and then Jupiter transiting Jupiter was opposite Mars for this latter one. And so you'll see, like, it's like, oh, well, so why did this soul call, first of all, why did he choose to have that aspect in his nativity? It's a very strong
Right.
aspect, Mars square Pluto. But why not exact like this? And how is it this synchronicity allows for that, like, not exactitude to ensure that during the course of these really powerful life cycle initiations, like once in life initiations, like Jupiter is going to be on the scene, right? And so
Right.
then we get this other image, right? That somehow this wants to be a Jupiterian way to Pluto square Pluto and Pluto opposite Mars,
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, for me, I always look at it as, well, there's many ways to look at it. One is that every one of these individual transits that are happening, they're like ingredients of a soul stew that we're cooking up for ourselves.
Yeah.
And then there's another thing I'll look at is like, well, what is the bowl that you're serving it in? I mean, we
Yeah.
often say that the teacup is important as the tea that you're drinking. And then also, whose kitchen are you in? Because that, like, so the Hellenistic perfections, like you shifting into a third sign perfection, for you that means Saturn, right? That's different for me at that
Yeah.
year. I'm actually in a Saturn perfection now. I'm older at 44, but I have a different rising sign, right? So there's this,
Yeah.
you'll see these cool syncs between people. You'll see these different arrangements. And I mean,
Are you in a Capricorn,
I'm actually in an
or
Aquarius
Aquarius?
perfection
Yeah.
ninth sign at 44. Yeah, with Gemini rising is Aquarius for me. So Saturn second year.
And will you have your Saturn opposition this year, or did you already have it?
It's happening now. And that also means
Okay.
for me, Saturn square Sun. And so one of the
Yeah.
ancient images is like, that's going to be way more powerful because Saturn is one of my time lords this year. And
Hmm.
and also because I was born at night, where like Saturn is said to be a little bit stronger and not in a
Well,
good
it's
way. And that in that Hellenistic mindset, which is not necessarily
right.
how I play, but I want to like do all that stuff and then and also like forget it, because like the whole point of the thing is like, okay, well, what does this time want from you, want from me?
Mm.
How does it want me to be? I was just writing about this morning, that like the chart shouldn't be read like some computer code that tells you who you are. It should be read like a coded invitation to the mystery school of whose curriculum is teaching you to become the greatest you, right? So
Right.
the question always for the chart or for the transit or for the initiation or the combination of transits and progressions and perfections and directions and the whole thing is like, oh, like, what does this want from me? What is the
Hmm.
invitation? And so the great gift of astrology, I think, is also the opportunity for us to ask that question, like culturally,
Right.
worldly, especially in crazy ass times like this. Or maybe not. I don't know. So
Yeah.
I'm glad
I
you,
was,
here you were able to get out of the house. I mean, it's hard to go have like the big date with the wife when for the birthday.
oh yeah. Well, and even my plan originally had been to go up to this amazing mountain called Mary's Peak in the area where I live, and the stargazing from up there is like just kind of unbelievable panoramic view. You can see the mountains and the ocean, from the same spot, but it's closed down because of all of this. It's one of the, so I had to just go to, like to a little field near my house. So no,
You were born with such a big moon that to go celebrate that return of your moon phase doesn't offer the greatest gazing with the sky anyway, because that big mirror of the sun up there, the moon, tends to eat a good amount of sky. So it's amazing to like really re-nature that experience of like moon phase, and like how much that like matters when you're out at night. But you have to get away from the city lights for it to even be a thing, right?
Right. Yeah. Although it is amazing. I remember when I lived in New York City, and I wasn't an astrologer at the time, but I forget, God, it must have been, you might be able to help me out. There was some crazy planetary alignment like in 2002 or 3 or something. Anyway, you could see it like no matter where you were in Manhattan. It just like, like occasionally these
so some conjunction, like a lot of planets in the same
exactly
frame of the
I can't
camera.
remember exactly what it was, but it looked like they were literally like coming down all in a line.
Yeah, so I'm looking at like April 2002 right now. I should actually go a little bit past that. There was this like, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn.
They were all visible
all in the sunset west.
Yep. I think that's what I remember it was. But when you're in New York, the stars that want to be seen will be, you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm teaching people like, and my approach is very like, get out there, be with the sky, and people will say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I live in New York or I live in LA. It's like, no. Yeah. I mean, it's actually kind of cool training to start connecting to the heavens where you can't see too much, because it's just overwhelming.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's like that with astrology, right? Like, how can we even begin simply when it's just so fucking endless? It's always like sitting with that challenge. I have a new student, right? I just met with before we're connecting here. And it's just like, and he's brilliant. He's like a super genius mind.
Yeah.
So it's just so tempting to do all the things.
Right.
But really learning to like, to discriminate, I mean, I'm not like discern, like that's a heart thing. Like, I mean, like just like say, okay, like we're going to walk through this door. And even though we're going to see all that stuff, like we're going to like keep walking that way, because that's where we're going today. And it's a tricky thing for me. It's a tricky thing for this particular guy's like energy. And so the two of us together, it's just like really a great like lesson. I love teaching so much because, it's not just me having an opportunity to learn astrology by teaching it, which of course is always the thing, but it's like learning life, right? So learning astrology is learning life, and then teaching astrology offers this amazing opportunity to learn life. And it's a lot like, we're speaking about moon reflecting sunlight, like the way that our students or people at a talk or our partners or whatever, like reflect us. It's the greatest experience of life, when we're allowed to be seen through another's eyes, if you will. So it's crazy. I got off with him. I was speaking at the end about, this guy's awesome. He fasts every Monday, so no food and no computer. Wow. He just goes full nature, a day every week. Clearly not a father of a few. So are you, right? But,
right.
I mean, I get, there's
The
definitely,
spiritual decadence, right? Like
yeah,
yeah, of being single, right? Of
like
being
single,
able to wake up and
out in the
yeah,
country, really
yeah,
able to kind of do that like natural human thing, like definitely envy
right.
that in some ways, and also see where I don't at all, because when I have the opportunity, sometimes I run away from being a human as fast as I can. But
Well,
anyway,
and then you,
talking to
yeah,
him about creating the old timekeeping device like a sundial, and just
yeah,
measuring shadow during the day and learning to see the sun at the midheaven, like not with a chart or not with a clock, but with the length of the shadow and the old ways of like the staff and the line, and creating the medicine circle. And I was telling him, yeah, you grab a staff that's important to you, or but I was also saying you might want to build a herm, right? So a stack of stones. Lucian, you've got we got like a crazy kind of clicking in and out going on. I'm wondering if it might go away if you take your headphones out. Would that be okay? And it might be an internet connection thing too. Let's see. Da 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 ba ba da da. And then maybe just turn your speakers down a couple.
okay.
Let's see how that. So you sound good,
Let
and
me, I'll,
I
yeah,
think the
you keep
clicking's
talking.
gone away. It's like it's less clicky.
Okay,
It might just be the Illuminati's wiretap or whatever. Um,
definitely. I think we're talking about stuff that important.
yeah, totally. They're listening to me all the time. They're really, really intrigued with. But hey, other guys talking about Bill Gates' vaccine dream. Anyway, so yeah, so I was talking about stacking stones, right? Like building herms. We had been talking earlier in the session about the crossroads and Mercury, as like a navigator, and Mercury as this like liminal one who can exist on many dimensions, and the importance of like in counseling, like speaking to the client's chart, speaking in the client's language rather than speaking in our own, or speaking to our chart, or like offering a reading that they want to receive rather than the one that we want to give, right? And like
Yeah,
that mercurial gift of being able to move into these different dimensions, it is that thing, right? So when I was talking about stacking stones or herms for Hermes, like I was recalling this time that I experienced a few years ago in Joshua Tree. And I was thinking it could be a fun little vehicle for our explorations today. So I'll say a little bit more about it. This was the day a few years ago when the sun was moving from the sign of Aries to the sign of Taurus.
okay.
It was like literally going to happen while I was at Joshua Tree. And I was coming back from some time in Sedona and driving to my father's place. He was at the time living in Vegas. And I linked up a friend who had a place where I could stay, like near Joshua Tree. And then I went there, and my first teacher, Daniel Jamario, he has like an intimate relationship with a stone there that he considers to be grandfather's stone, that basically gave him his mission. And so I thought I'd have this kind of pilgrimage, like connecting more deeply to the lineage in which I had started my study, and that I was going to walk to the stone where I had been, like the way that he did, which I hadn't done before. And unlike in that school, I had started opening to traditional astrology, where Aries is ruled by Mars and Taurus is ruled by Venus. Like that's not part of the shamanic astrology approach. Like Rujar, who was Daniel's mentor, like they just don't do rulerships. But I was starting to tune into this. And so I was really wondering, like as sun moves from Aries to Taurus, what is this like difference between Mars and Venus, It was really like in my consciousness. And so I get to the visitors space where you have to buy your pass for the day. And they're like, bring water, and this sign that was just like the skeleton of like a ram. And so I was like, oh, there's a little bit of Aries for you, right? And so, and I should have listened better, because what happened that day is I'm just walking, it's just a trail. And I was so mesmerized by the flowers. So this was years, like after years of drought, there was a big rain this year, so 2017. And the cacti bloomed so huge and beautifully that you could literally see the desert bloom from space. Like there were satellite pictures.
Oh, I remember, yeah, seeing those pictures. Yeah.
And so I'm like right on the ground experience this in just this state of like beauty shock, right?
Yeah.
And I was taking all these pictures of these flowers, and you know, it's so beautiful, like the cactus flower. And I was thinking of flower like as Venus, and like the cactus like spikes as Mars. And I was like really seeing how the spikes of the cactus kind of protect space for that flower to bloom. But then I had just stayed that night before, and then also in Sedona, where there were so many like cactuses that people were keeping, you know, and nurturing as like houseplants, if you will, because the flower is so beautiful. In that sense, it was like the only reason why they were keeping these kind of dangerous, super spiky beings around is because the flower is so epic. And so I saw how, in that regard, the flower was like protecting the spiky one. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm on my pilgrimage, and I'm skipping around and being the weirdo that I am. And then so at one point I'm like, oh, I need to give some offerings to these flowers. Like I haven't been reverent. And so I didn't have anything. I had like orange peels. And so I'm like giving orange peels to these flowers. And then suddenly I was like, I don't want to walk back on the track. Like I know my car is that way. And so I'm going to go like through the wilderness. Like big mistake, right? And so like 2 hours later, I climb up onto a thing, and I look in every direction, there is nothing. It's just endless Joshua tree. And I was like, right. And so I like take stock. I have like shorts, a t-shirt, and a windbreaker, like a little bit of water in my camelback, like, I don't know, a kind bar and an orange or something. And it was like, good, right? Like, so I was starting to think about how I'm going to die out here. It was super hot. It was nearing sunset. And you know how cold it gets in the desert. So I'm freaking out. But the reason why I share this, well, there's a few different reasons, but one is I didn't share all this with the students today, but I was talking about how building herms, and I was thinking about this moment because as I was all scared, I decided to like call in Mercury and receive some guidance, right? And to hear, we call it the language of the birds, right? And so stacking stones, right? A cairn, we call it, or a herm for Hermes. And it does a few things. One, it serves as a sundial. So does my body if I stand straight, you know. But it also just drops you into the moment. Like it's not easy to balance stones on one another, as we know. And so just being in that like state of necessary presence to engage with that act, it slows me down enough that then I can hear the signs once again, right? And I actually called, like, crow has been one of the beings that I work with a lot. But it was weird. I was calling in crow, but I didn't say crow. I said blackbird. I said this out loud, and this like magpie, this blackbird flew by and flew in the direction where I had been walking. And it was just a nice confirmation, because at this time I was really tuned into the necessity of my training and what I teach, which is like to know which way your shadow points throughout the course of the day, to like stay tuned to the old ways of celestial navigation. Lucian, I see that you are fully frozen. So I'm just going to switch modes here until you're up and running again. And I'll speak to our other friends who might be here live or listening sometime in the future. Yeah, and so this day was just crazy, where eventually I found my way back to my car, and the story continues from there. I guess while we're waiting for Lucian, I'll continue to speak it. Like at one point I had to climb, it's like kind of the most difficult climb I've ever had, so that I could get an elevated view. And speaking of Mercury, the first thing that I saw was this car. I see that you're back. I just decided to continue because I saw that.
Yeah, awesome.
So I was just talking about how I had to climb to a high hill, and the first thing I saw was this car. And so it was like, oh wow, a sign of civilization. And so I went down there, and it was actually this old rusty truck that was like long dead, which is always an important symbol. But it was at a place which is kind of on the Joshua Tree map. It's like this old ranch. And I saw a footprint, and then I saw a car track. And so then it's like now night, and I remember Jupiter was in the west. The sun had just set, and I'm just kind of giving prayers to Jupiter for helping me make it through. And then I find my way to this like campsite, and I'm trying to get people to drive me to the next thing, which is a ways away to get to my car. I still had to drive to Vegas that night. And it was interesting. Like 3 places I stopped, people were really friendly and willing to talk, but nobody would drive me because they were drunk. So I was like, all right, that's an interesting symbol. And finally got to a place where guys were kind of like pointing to Jupiter and like, what is that? And I was like, oh, that's Jupiter. And they're like, you know the stars? I said, yeah. And I rapped to them about it. And then one was like, you know what? I haven't been drinking. I can drive you to your thing. And then it turns out he was a musician who was in Joshua Tree to take a little break from recording a record in LA. And he lives in New York, and he's good friends with my friend Eric Deutsch, who I used to play in a band with. And Eric and I are now working together to create like songs of people's birth charts, which is something that I'm doing a lot of right now. In fact, I'll do 3 of them after we get off of this conversation, which has turned into a monologue. So let me stop that. But there's a few reasons why I share all of this right now. Number 1, shadow work is not just a psychological thing. Like doing this literally and knowing where your shadow points during the day and following the sun and understanding like the way that the directions work is such a profound tool that helps us like deepen into our human experience. And with people like sheltered in place, I highly recommend you learn how to build a sundial, a medicine wheel now, and like learn how to get directions. Another is just this idea of slowing down, breathing, looking into like our spiritual practices. For example, just stacking stones, because it takes us out of like the madness and into the moment where there can't be madness. Number 3, is it the spike that protects the flower or the flower that protects the spike? And I say all this because just after I got off this meeting with a student this morning, I went onto Facebook to post about this conversation we were staging, and I saw a picture remind me that that was 3 years ago to this day. Right? It's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll share about that. So here we are in this kind of spiky time, this like cactus time, and the question is, what's the flower?
Right.
So I pose this question to you.
Oh, I wish I had an answer. You know, my experience has been like at first, you know, when this first all went down, I was really experiencing like a lot of the, which tends to be my pattern anyway, of like the silver lining, or the, you know, I've got that Jupiter on the ascendant, right? So I like, it is in Scorpio, but I do see the positive, you know, it's like, ooh, where's the growth going to be? Where's the learning going to be? And of course that's kind of still there. I just, with my clients and even with myself, you know, it's really been, when you check in with clients on a weekly basis, to kind of see like the different layers that people, you know, the like the kind of the shock, and then the grief, and then the frustration, or that, you know, the anxiety, or then the normalizing, or kind of coming to terms with it, which is where I think a lot of people are right now, you know, that especially this past week, it's like, you know, there's more of that sense of we are going to move, time is going to continue on. There are going to be, right, they're already presenting those phases on how we're going to go back to some sort of you know, some sort of being able to get out of shelter in place mentality. But that it's also just, it's feeling more normal for people to be at home, to be with their families.
Well, a
they've been
timeline for getting out of shelter in place existence, getting out of shelter in place mentality is going to be a
right.
whole nother thing, right?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. That's probably more of the concern in a way. The level of fear. How long are people going to walk around with masks and gloves? Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah, the scariest thing to me has been like out on the trail, and just when you say hi to somebody, their response is if they're being attacked by a
Right.
virus.
Yeah.
It hasn't been with everybody. Like some people are just like, "What's up?" Or kind of like getting to the opposite side of the thing, which like the good.
Yeah.
But like I've just like hello, and people will like turn their back and like start walking away.
Yeah.
All like cowered over. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's not healthy. Like
No.
that's a really great energy to be within that's going to get us all sick.
Yeah, I think that's a great, that's an avoidant, right, response, right? It's a flee response. Um, it's interesting, and yeah, that the impact that has when someone's body language does that, right? Like, because I've been on those walks too, and you see the people who are super bright and sunny, and hey, how's it going? Or we'll separate, but with a little bit, there's still warmth in between it, in the space, versus people who are really living in that kind of deep fear of we got to be exactly 6 feet apart, or 9 feet apart, right? Or else you're gonna infect me, and just with that, like, yeah, it's such a bummer, right? I know for me, it causes me to feel anxiety then, not fear about getting sick, but just this general sense of being unwelcome.
Yeah, or invasive, right? Like I
Yeah.
had this experience in Japan. Like when I was there, I really wanted to bow. And so I
Yeah.
was hoping I could like lock eyes with somebody and give a little something, and
Yeah.
feel like I was tuning in, right? And I'm
Yeah.
projecting obviously a lot of ridiculous idiocy when I say this, but whatever, that's who I am. But it wasn't that way. Like especially in a city like in Tokyo, which was overwhelming, like the amount of people, and then the ability of people to like not collide. It was so interesting. That scene in The Matrix, those many scenes where they're in the New York streets, and it's just,
Yeah.
and you've experienced it. It's a gazillion of people, and somehow, like, though we're not flying like in sync like the flock of birds, we're not all bumping into each other. It's like a pretty amazing thing that speaks to the human facility. But yeah, what I noticed in Japan is like if I did make eye contact with somebody, it's as if I made them feel bad for like breaking their code of like boundaries.
Yeah.
And then I just felt so terrible about that. It wasn't just like, I don't want to look at you like idiot foreigner white boy. It was just like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have like dishonored somebody by looking at them in the eyes, and it was just like, whoa. There, and that I'm seeing that like, and it's more of a fear-based thing. I mean, like I think that system is also a fear-based thing in many ways, but this one it's a different thing. What's common is like the masks everywhere, and I mean it's going to be interesting to see if this means like masked people from now on.
Right. Well, I'm sure there will be some of that. I mean, maybe you'll see it in San Francisco. I'm sure New York City that will be strong there for a while. And I was just listening to Richard Tarnas and some of the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness grads did like a little webinar last night. You can look it up on YouTube. Um, and the thing about Richard Tarnas is he uses such wide orbs, right, for these sorts of transits. So it's like really looking at like,
Long
this
period.
Saturn Pluto conjunction and the Jupiter Pluto conjunction and the Saturn, like all the big stuff that's going on, we're really going to see, maybe it won't be so as intense, but that it will be the next 2 or 3 years actually that, maybe we see those masks, right? Or I've heard him also talk about how, oftentimes it's after the conjunction of the planets that you then see the unfolding of those archetypes in a more lasting way in the culture. So that is another consideration of like that this is definitely going to print the same way. September 11th, 9/11, it's like I lived in New York City at the time. I think it was a good 3 years after 9/11 that you would still see the military in the subways with giant, machine guns, right?
We're
Which
still taking
that's
off
not
our
there.
shoes at the
You don't see
airport.
that. Right. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. I mean, yeah, and I actually linked that event astrologically with an eclipse that happened a few months before. So, and there's another one coming up this June
In
solstice.
June, yeah, that's really
That's
big one.
like that day, but I mean, you don't see a seed, right?
Right.
You don't see a new moon.
Right.
Right? Like the moon reveals herself sometime after that. And that's typically how I experience the timings that people are experiencing their own transits. And it's not necessarily like the exact alignment. I think it's a really good day to have like some ceremony around the thing. And if it's visible, to get out in the sky and be with that, but it's typically after the beginning when you experience that it is a thing at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to look at any of these um, upcoming transits?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
do. One thing I did, I felt pretty strongly, I don't know how it was for you, but when Mercury left Pisces and entered Aries, I
Huge.
mean, that was like a really good cup of coffee. Like that's basically the best way to describe it for me. Like, okay, the morning before I've had coffee, and then the hour after you've had your cup of coffee.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
there was a little
Transition
bit
from
of
Pisces.
Mercury's retrograde that dipped him back into Aquarius for, just the last couple of degrees of Aquarius. But for the most part, Mercury was in Pisces for 7 weeks. And
Right.
I think there's a beautiful, like, watery, compassionate, poetic, dreamy
Yeah.
expression of that Pisces Mercury, very archetypal. It's the second stage of the alchemical transmutation is dissolution, releasing our grip on what we think reality is so we can enter the world of the symbols, But it's also entirely charged in the potential of dynamic delusion.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say those words together because delusion can't be dynamic. That's the point of it. Like, I mean, I don't want to say that people aren't sick right now, right, at all. But looking at the way that, 80% false positives in the way that they're testing for this virus, looking at how doctors are being encouraged to classify people who have died as coronavirus people,
Yeah.
even though they're not being tested, et cetera. Like, clearly there's something happening here where these numbers are being intentionally inflated, right? Probably to inflate that fear. And then I could go into my many Scorpio rabbit holes to say why I think that is, et cetera. But I think with Pisces, with like Mercury entering Aries and quickly sextiled Saturn, then it will be to Venus, then it will be to Mars. I think people are going to start getting angry, and it is like a huge cup of collective coffee that's just like, wake the fuck up. You know what I mean? And we're all going to do this in different ways. There's going to be plenty of people who have their awakening stimulated by, I can't afford shelter in place. Right? Like there's people who like are out of their job. First of all, like you've been deemed non-essential. So that should stimulate some kind of response.
Feeling.
Right? And especially when like the money runs out and the food runs out, like how far is like the IRS's 1,200, interestingly 12, right? $1,200 check gonna take you? And so especially, I mean, gosh, you lived in New York City, you know, like there's plenty of people in New York who are not going to be held down by this fear thing for too long. And it's interesting to see that New York is this place in the States where it's like, you know, most active right now. And so, I mean, I'm really confused about what this thing is and what it isn't. But no doubt, like I'm at home, sheltered in place. It's also just really interesting to see how, like, what on one level you could say compassionately we've accepted, you know, the commandments by the elders so that we can stay safe and help others stay safe, you know.
Yeah.
I don't want to kill an old person by breathing, right? That's kind of, and so I will choose to like limit my own experience to within the walls to like stay safe for me and to keep others safe. And like, that's a compassionate thing to do. Right.
Right.
On another level, it just feels eerily docile that everyone has like taken the commandment of house arrest with like zero resistance.
Yeah.
And that terrifies me. Right.
Well, going back to but so much of that, you know, going to the archetype of Mercury is like the information. It's like, this has been, I mean, one of the biggest questions that this has brought up for me just in general is like, what is the truth? What is truth? I don't mean just in terms of the coronavirus, but, you know, we're talking, we don't have to go into it, but we're talking about the different zodiacs, or we're going, you know, this perspective that from our little subjective point of being human or being incarnated and having a perspective, it's like, what is the actual truth? And there's so much, I mean, with the internet, with the media, with the news, it's hard for me to even, I can't go down the conspiracy kind of realm because I get, you know, there's so many, I believe, you know, there's obviously some sort of consensus reality around the virus, right? There's some sort of agreement that there is a virus, right? But
then we're also like, well, what is a virus? That becomes this incredibly interesting question.
Right.
And this whole like germ theory like came in before we had the technology to vet it. And once we did, we basically disproved what it says, but we were already committed to that belief of that paradigm. So it's interesting to see like what many of like the modern medical researchers are saying. But it's cool. Like, so that's some of the flower of the thorn, if you will. Like we might actually level up in our knowledge and our wisdom, and that should then help us perhaps release like a paradigm of like, you know, false pharmaceuticals for things that might actually work if we allow ourselves to like reinvent what we know about a thing. Like that's the kind of thing that can happen when you release your grip on your reality and enter the dream. Like you might just end up in a whole new reality on the other side. Like that's one of the great gifts of the liminal one, you know. And you'll see like I like button this because I want to like cover my like throat chakra and not say all the shit that's terrifying me right now. Because I was about to go on that road. So it's like, let's just like button that in a little bit. Like there's one more if it's necessary, just let me know. But yeah, I mean it is a time regardless where people are going to start asking why. in a really active way. And then come May, when the nodes regress into Gemini and Sagittarius, that's going to be a whole different level of commitment to why and what is truth and what is the one only truth, or actually,
or are there a multiplicity of truth?
Right. So South Node and Sagittarius, like, what is the one truth reality that I've lived in, and is that even real? Because there's actually many truths, right? North Node and Gemini, and that, I mean, like, I'm fascinated by that shift that's coming soon to a theater called You and Me.
Well, and with the retrograde, all the Saturn, Pluto going retrograde, Jupiter going retrograde too. I mean, that is how I normally think of retrograde motion too, is the planets aren't going backwards, they're going backwards from our perspective. Right? Like, that's, that is kind of where or another way to think of it is like, the planets and the cosmos is the objective psyche, right? Where what happens within us is the kind of subjective psyche. And so when I feel like when there's some loss during retrograde periods or potential that those that we lose connection to that objective.
Right. Psyche. Yeah. I mean, the truth is, I think astrology is still married to much of the superstition in regards to retrogradation that was tied to the truth that when we didn't have a cosmology that supported the astronomical awareness that is an illusion, right? When we can't understand a thing, the rational mind, is afraid of it.
Right.
And so astronomy is kind of like graduated beyond that fear. It took the remembrance of a sun-centered or heliocentric cosmology to understand why planets appear to move retrograde in the zodiac, right? And astrology in a way doesn't seem to have gotten the point, but also it is happening. And I like how you say objective and subjective. Like, from Earth's point of view, those planets are stopping, and then they're hitting reverse and moving backwards through the constellations and the signs, or at least the degrees. Saturn's going to having ingress to Aquarius. He's going to stop, turn around, and go back into Capricorn, right? I mean, from our point of view, that is happening, and our point of view obviously matters. Even thinking globally, that matters. I was just talking to another student about this yesterday. She's like, whoa, what's up with Mercury's, Mercury orbits the sun in 88 days. And I love that. There's 88 keys in a grand piano. She works in gene keys, which is rooted in the human design work, where they're very interested in when the sun was 88 degrees before your birth, which can be 88 days.
Yeah.
So she was like, oh, is that a Mercury thing? But then she's an astrologer and she's tracking Mercury through the chart. And she's like, wait a second, but Mercury doesn't go around the chart in 88 days. And it's like, yeah, because we're not sitting from the objective reality, like the stands in the outside in stillness, like watching these cars go around the racetrack. If we were, we would see Mercury getting around in 88 Earth days.
Right.
We're in a car.
Yeah.
And so our perspective of how long it takes Mercury to lap us is not the same as it takes him to get from one point of the track back to that same point, because we're moving, right? And so it's really beautiful in astrology that we can learn more and learn, oh, there's something about Mercury's 118 days. That's Earth, Mercury, Sun. That's the synodic cycle, the meeting cycle.
Yeah.
And then there's also something about Mercury around the sun, which is something we experience in a very different way. But that 88 days, it's kind of like we have to take the mathematician's word for it. What I mean? Not something that we actually can see.
Yeah. No, and this is actually so Rudolf Steiner, I believe, I don't know exactly where he said this, but so I could be totally making this up, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. But it's still a fun idea to play with. He said that retrogradation is actually connected to the human, to the astral body, right? Like,
Wait, say that again. You just broke up a little bit.
Oh, that retrograde cycles kind of hold the mystery to what he called the human astral body, right? So astral body just kind of being like, think of it as our sentience, right? The astral body is the part of our soul that has a subjective experience, right? As what we're saying, like, you know, Mercury is just going around in 88 days, but from our perspective, right, we have a different experience of that when we're in the car of, you know, of our sensory embodied experience, right? And that holds the key, what he says, for human error, right? That right there is like, you know, the symbology of like the fall from paradise or the fall from the Garden of Eden, actually lies in what he calls the kind of retrograde. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's so many different astrological, or let me say astronomical things that are actually based upon the illusions of our subjectivity, but therefore they're not subjects. I mean, in that regard, I'll just say that human error is not an error. Like, right? There's a point of coming into this place and having this type of experience. And then as we open our consciousness, right. And are able to live in it, but also see from realms outside of it, then we can marry those two, right? That's the point of the thing. Like, that's what astrology as a way in will offer versus astrology as a way out, where we're just saying, oh, you know, this Saturn Sun thing.
Well, that's the essence of evolution, right? Is that there is that development. Right.
And the cycles really guide that, right? So, I mean, I know this is one of your principal devotions as a seeker and student and teacher of the astrological mysteries and counselor, is like cycles, cyclical awareness, right? So in that regard, you know, it is very important that from our point of view, Mercury passes Earth by. That's the retrograde Mercury, and conjoins the sun about every 116 days. It's interestingly, he does this pi times on average in a year, 3.14 times.
Okay.
Which obviously means 3 times, but then, you know, if you average this over many years, you find that it's like literally pi cycles a year for Mercury, which is incredible. There's another thing he does, which is like 22 cycles in 7 years, which is, you know, another pi play, because one of the old fractions to get towards the weird thing called pi is 22 sevenths. So Mercury is just this brilliant magician and mathematician. But we started a Pisces Mercury cycle from the way that I work with them these days.
Inferior conjunction.
Yeah, which inferior meaning low, which says a lot about the old cosmology of the cosmos, right? That's when Mercury is between Earth and the sun. So just like a new moon is between
the new moon,
Mercury and Venus, the interior decorators can do that, right? They can align between Earth and sun. And that happened, I think it was February 25th was the Mercury Cazimi, retrograde Mercury, halfway between his 3-week retrograde dance, when it's Earth, Mercury, Sun, right? Like, we're not going to see that. We actually could see the previous one, which was in Scorpio on November 11th, 2019, because that one also happened at one of Mercury's nodes. And so, like,
and that was right when they did the first case of the virus, right around November 11th or 13th,
in a Mercury Scorpio cycle. Right. And a Mercury transit. And those aren't rare. Like Venus transits, we had one in 2004 and one in 2012, and there won't be another one in our lifetimes. Like, you basically get 2 in the, you know, length of a human life. But with Mercury, they're like every and they can be like every 6 or 7 years alternating. It's a really cool rhythm that he does. But yeah, Anna and Koa and I went and looked through one of the telescopes, like infiltrated the astronomers' camp, and we saw little Mercury in front of the sun disk through, you have to use technology to do that. But again, that's like another thing that expands. It's like, just like astrology, in some regards, this technology will help us expand our experience beyond the limits of the human senses, and that can be a great gift. It can also, of course, be a handicap. So, Mercury has moved into the sign of Aries. I was really waiting for that to do many things, including probably buy a new car, and now fuck that. Like, what do I need a car for? We certainly don't need more than one, and that's a good consideration of right? But so it's cool, like how sometimes astrology will like handcuff us from just taking action, but then and like sometimes it will be just like that. I didn't do something because of some chart. I kind of felt foolish or fatalistically trapped by that, but then it like paid off for me for a reason I could not expect. And that's also a very kind of mercurial or eclipsy thing. So Mercury has moved into the sign of Aries. That was April 12th or 10th at night, or 11th for many people. But Mercury will be in this Pisces cycle that began February 25th, the way that I do it, until his next interior cazimi, which is in Cancer, on June 30th. And then we're still in the water way. There's this really cool thing that Mercury does. I call these the overmind cycles.
Yeah, where it stays in all the elements for a year. Is that what?
Well, yeah, it's not quite that regular with that weird magician. But I look at Mercury now. So Mercury's in Aries. It's like, mind. Like people born right now, I look at Aries Mercury as their own personal thing, but I would also look and see that they're born into a Pisces Mercury cycle, and I call that the overmind. So like the Aries Mercury will be the kind of their personal driving force, but if they connect to that other thing, which is global and more cultural, like a greater time, right? It's one of the ways to kind of get up and experience more of the thing on the way to the point where like there's no signs at all, there's no cycles, there's only the one. But yeah, Mercury, he does these, interestingly, he does these like meta retrogrades, because either for 4 of his cycles, which average 116 to 118 days, they're very like, that's actually a pretty wide range. Mercury has a very eccentric orbit, like a very elliptical orbit. It's not some like perfect circle in any regard, which you would not want with Mercury, right? A very eccentric one. So in either 4 of those cycles or 6 of those cycles will be in the same element. So we've been doing water Mercury cycles since March of 2019 in Pisces. And now we're in Pisces, then we'll do Cancer, then we'll do another Scorpio one. This one has 6 water cycles. And then we'll move into the air with a Mercury Sun conjunction in Aquarius in February of 2021. Yeah. But notice that he goes from water to air.
Yeah.
And then he'll go to the earth, and then he'll go to the fire. And so he's moving through the elements, and even in the cyclical way, retrograde in regards to the natural zodiacal order.
Yeah.
Just like the nodes do, just like precessional motion, like the motion of the ages or the signs through the constellations move precession backwards motion, right? So there's many different like shorter rhythms or like higher frequencies, like shorter timings that tune us into the energies of like the great year. And so I'm really fascinated with that, because when we're talking about like the shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, for example, we'll dig that Mercury's now in a Pisces cycle, and at this time next year he'll be in an Aquarius cycle.
Right. And so that's like a little mini age of
It's like an announcement, a welcoming, a reminder that it's a thing. It's definitely not the criterion. Like a lot of people are saying, oh, like Saturn and Jupiter will conjoin in Aquarius this year. That's the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Like no, you're talking about Saturn. Follow the fucking rules. Like that's not what the turning of the ages doctrine is about. It's about following
I
like.
think that's the temptation, I think, of being an astrologer, is like we just want the newness, right? It's like something new and exciting is going to happen.
Especially when it sucks.
Right, right.
Yeah. When is this? That's like one of the biggest questions, right? From a client when they're in their own personal trauma, crisis, initiation, right? When does it end?
Yeah.
And I mean, astrology has answers, but that's not the right question.
Right.
The
Well, and
question
there's
is,
like,
what does it want from you?
yes. What's the
And if
growth?
you choose to step into that, you may just not want this thing to end because it is the great awakener, right? And then when you don't want it to end, that's when it ends because you don't need it anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
when have you gotten all the remedy out of it? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the worst way we can experience a transit is to not experience it.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's in that sense a missed opportunity.
It is a really interesting, I mean, this is obviously affecting everybody in different ways, and some people where this is affecting personal chart points, it may be aligning. I certainly see a lot of people where there's been pretty significant changes for them coinciding with this kind of global happening of the coronavirus, of this kind of global crisis, but where they're having personal things where, the day before they went into shelter in place, their partner asked for a divorce, or they were going bankrupt on their house, or, people were already having these kind of Saturn Pluto conjunction experiences. But what is kind of really interesting about this is that regardless of your personal astrology, everybody's, it might be easy to say that almost everybody on the planet is being affected by this.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. And also, regardless of what it is,
Yeah.
like, I don't need to know the reason of what it is to be in it.
Yes.
And so that's also a really cool reminder about astrology and like the celestial conversation. Like, there are things that are happening, like you just mentioned the Saturn Pluto, right?
Yeah.
That's happening for all of us. And then the great art of the chart is like, oh, well, let me see how that is likely to influence you personally based on how that shape that we're all experiencing addresses the shape of the planetary geometry at the moment of your becoming, right?
Right.
And so it's so wonderful to be able to tune into a global thing.
Yeah.
And also see how that global thing is going to like dance you versus how it dances me. And then, I also love that you just called out like Saturn Pluto, because one of the issues with this coronavirus happening is we don't have a chart.
Right.
Astrology without a chart is like, it's pretty limited, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's not just like we don't have a birth time and can't do houses. Like, we don't have a fucking chart, right? So what we're doing is assigning powerful timings, like the first case was, you mentioned earlier, like the Mercury Cazimi. So maybe we'll look at that chart and say that this is one of like the charts, or the eclipse on December 26th with Jupiter in fall and all that, that was pretty close to, or the Capricorn ingress or the Aries ingress as a statement for the year ahead, or maybe that Saturn Pluto conjunction on January 12th. Like, is that the thing? I mean, that's certainly the one that more than anything else, like modern astrologers have been looking to as a statement of like the craziness of this time.
Yeah.
So it's challenging to not have a chart, but it's also completely exciting to like try to dig around and see like which ones maybe are a best fit. And that can also be a complete distraction from, and even a strategy employed to avoid just experiencing the thing, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think that's the whole practice of, embodying astrology, right? That astrology is just a kind of, especially charts that we look at on our computer. I mean, these are just kind of abstract reference points. But, like I had a client who knows nothing about astrology. The first time I talked to him after the shelter in place, he said like, oh yeah, he's like, this is like World War I or World War II or September 11th. I mean, it just like came out of his, like, just talking about what was happening on the globe,
like other nodes of the same cycle,
other historical moments that, like he was just referencing that this was going to have an epic historical influence.
Did you mention like how the astrology and how like the Saturn Pluto cycle have also been on that, or was that not the place to go since you were in?
Yeah, this was just a psycho. I did, mention that astrologically there were things going on. He's not someone who's at all informed about astrology or would want to maybe go down that rabbit hole. But I just thought that was a perfect kind of evidence of like, these archetypes are manifest in reality, right? They're embodied experience, right?
Yeah, it's real.
There's just a map or language. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the weirdest thing about astrology is that it is real.
Yes.
It's also really hard to put your finger on, right? I mean, we've talked about this in our previous conversations here. It's, I mean, I guess it's a gift that astrologers aren't really surprised that this time is so crazy. Like, I actually think it's going to get crazier. And I don't think it's necessarily that this virus itself gets crazier. I'm seeing some different, hold on. Let me like put another button in here. But I think that it's nice to not have been surprised, and yet also like, what good does it do if I can't say what it's going to be? I can just say this is what it was last time and the time before that, and so it's something like that. Like Capricorn's hosting all these things. It's probably about government and structure. This planet's involved. There's financial stuff going on.
Right. Well, it's Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Right? It what?
History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
I have a teacher who's like, I won't practice predictive astrology. It's like, because I want to honor free will. It's great. And then in the next breath, he'll tell you you're in a Pluto cycle. And what this means is like, it can't be predicted, but it's going to be about something that you don't have the tools to deal with it, and all these other very predictive things. It's like, but if you're telling me I don't have the tools to deal with it, that is a prediction. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, on one level, it's kind of nice to go to the ancient thing and be like, yeah, that shit will end on August 8th when this happens. You know what I mean? It's like, sometimes that can, but when we want to grip that, right? We want the timeline. We want to know that there's a route out. We want to know that there's a date that it ends, but that can be the worst thing to offer, because then you just wait for the date instead of do what you are called to do between now and then to make it matter, right? And that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
So there's a word that you said earlier where I was like, I didn't have enough buttons for, which is like, this is that period when we're normalizing.
Yeah.
this isn't normal.
Right.
Right? I mean, James Corbett, who like not everybody's ready for the Corbett report. It definitely takes you into some pretty deep rabbit holes. But he did a short recently, which I very much appreciate, which is like, this is not normal. It's like exclamation point. Like, look, it is not normal to have like medical martial law. Please don't accept this as normal. It is not normal to have the Fed printing trillions of dollars out of the air to feed the banks again. Like, no, that's not normal. So reject this as a state of normality. Like, that doesn't mean that we don't want to adjust to it.
But I mean normalcy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear
what
that's,
I mean
that's
by
not
normal.
what you're saying.
No. And I think the positive side of normal is more that like being able to, we've all been disoriented, right? Like there's this massive, you know, and I can't speak for everybody, but I know for myself, is that there's been this, and still to some degree, this deep level of disorientation, right? Because of all the not being able to leave the house, of everything being closed down, of all these things that help us kind of normalize our experience, right? So like there's all these things that have been disorienting. And what I'm noticing now is that I'm actually, you know, to be able to reorient, come back into my body more fully, you know, have been for the past 5 weeks, right? Like, you know, I feel less distracted, right? I feel like I can focus better. Yeah, I'm able to like orient my attention and myself in a new way.
Totally.
And I think like those are the things I'm saying, like, when can people go back to, like, I share an office with a bunch of massage therapists who all haven't been able to work now for the past 5 weeks, you know, and yes, things are going to stay not normal, and we're going to have to be dealing with, like you said, some of these much bigger issues, like, are there going to be mandatory vaccines? Are there going to be, you know, what level of control is going to be implemented? Is, I mean, that's all definitely scary, but I think the things that allow people to orient in their world are going to start coming, you know, slowly coming back, but sooner.
I mean, one thing I'll say is like the old normal, like it's done. We're not going to be going back to where we've come from, and that's good. Like we're being challenged to create the image of the new world, right? Not the new world order according to the old ones, like our new world. And I think we really need to actively dream into that. We have been, in a sense, like flying through space, you know, where there is no up and down, right? But even when you're in that, like, you know, wild space where there's no north, there's no up, there's nothing wrong with deciding this way is up, and like using to create a reference plane, so now you can move purposefully, right? Because if you don't know which way is forward, right, then you don't know if you're just traveling backwards or not, right? So that's where we're at. To bring this back to that story that I shared earlier, like, we are currently lost in the desert.
Yes.
And it's time to look at which way your fucking shadow's pointing, right? So getting into you, looking into the shadow within, the shadow without, having some appreciation for the shadow will reveal not only where the light is shining from, but like will help you orient, define
image right there is
directions, and walk in the way that you want to go. May it be so. And brother, you are frozen once again. I think that's probably the right way for us to end this one. And
yeah, sounds good.
okay, cool. Yeah, we have a weird internet connection and an amazingly lovely heart connection, brother. So it's really great
really
to
nice
speak
to
with
talk.
you again, Lucian. Tell people where they can find you online.
My Facebook page, Lucian Schloss, or Sacred Timeline Astrology. My website is lucianschlosscounseling.com. I can put that in.
Do it. And they can link there from Sacred Timing Astrology on Facebook. I'm sure you can find me at Gemini Brett Astrology at Facebook. Or at GeminiBrett.com. This is a really powerful time to tune into, like, how are these crazy epic alignments we've all been looking forward to for years, like how are they aligning to your own personal nativity? Like, you know, we are going through something global, and when we start taking it personally and acting locally, right, then like we will assist this thing to shift towards a very beautiful way. There is no doubt that this is that time we've been calling in, when the whole world will change. It just is important for us to be the change agents, not just waiting to respond to however some other what he wants to dream your world in for you. So wake up, y'all. Thanks for, actually a better expression is, thanks for choosing to be awakened in this weird dream. Right? And so I think it's important too, also, like, not to be the one who wants to shake others awake, like, but rather the one that understands, like, the true purpose of the spiritual warrior is to keep the fire lit so that the dreamer can sleep peacefully and awaken at their own pace with that vision intact that will set us free. We are each awakened warriors, and we are each beautiful dreamers, and we have to honor both sides of ourselves, be it subjective, objective, self, spirit, whatever you want to call it, right? And come from this thing from both sides so we can meet in the middle way, and not like just do the woo way, but be woo way. So we can be in our like action of non-action and very purposefully dream at this time.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, brother. Well, I look forward to when we get to spend some time on Earth once again, and let's keep these things happening. They've been very informative and helpful for me. I really appreciate you spending some time.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
For everyone that's tuned in also and is present right now, we feel you here, whether it's happening live for you or later in time. Thank you very much, and please may this inspire you to share your wisdom with the world. Hit that go live button, make a video, make a podcast. You know, you are an agent, an imperative agent in this dream that we are collectively building right now. Like, every node of the web matters so much, right? So we are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are excited to hear from you. See you in space, y'all.
Awesome.